Larry Namer went from installing cable TV wiring in New York City to founding the international mega-hit cable TV show E! Entertainment, which has been shown in over 140 countries. Now, through his company Metan Global, he's developing programming for the Chinese market, as well as making an international movie about Empress Wu, the only female ruler in Chinese history. And that's just the beginning. I'm Jane Singer, and welcome to A Seat at the Table. In this episode, I sit down with Larry to learn more about his focus on China's media market, how he sees the entertainment industry evolving as a result of the pandemic, and a new venture that he's just gotten involved with. I had a chance to hear about Larry's adventure-filled journey from New York to LA during the early days of cable television, to his work in Russia and China's media industries, as well as his experience trying to adapt live Broadway theater into movies for television. Larry has an eye for opportunity and the ability to take that from idea to execution. Join me and learn how he's turned unlikely circumstances into success stories. Thanks for joining me today, Larry. When we were talking last week, you were telling me that your company, Metan Global, was developing programming for a global Chinese-speaking audience. I'd love to hear more about what you're doing.
Several of the projects that we're doing now, I've got a project called Explore the World, which is done in Mandarin. So the hosts are Chinese, half of the crew, the production crew is Chinese, and the other half is U.S. But it's really looking at the fact that, there are a huge number of Mandarin speakers that live outside of China, and there are also, an incredible number of people who travel from China to other places every year. I mean, this year without the pandemic, the numbers were targeted 110 million Chinese will travel outside of China.
Wow.
Which makes them the largest outbound tourist group in the world. And, we realize that travelers, Chinese travelers tend to be younger. They tend to be more educated. They tend to, have a reasonable degree of English language. They certainly know of Paris and London. We just said there are all these very cool places that Chinese folks will like, but they really don't know about them. And so we created a series called Explore the World. And before the quarantine, and we had to get everybody home as quick as possible, we started shooting it. And, we started looking at the Balkans. Croatia, Serbia, Macedonia, those places, which are incredible. And we know that Chinese folks will love them if they only knew about them. So,
why did you choose those places?
Well, because we think they have a great food scene going on. There's a great pop culture scene going on. The economy is now, somewhat vibrant. There's history there. You take Croatia and you look at Dubrovnik, and Dubrovnik was a city that was featured in Game of Thrones, which was a huge TV show in China. And, we said Chinese folks are just so interested in this, this area, from what they've seen on Game of Thrones, and they don't realize how much else there is there. So we just like, and it's on the Adriatic Sea, and it's beautiful, and there's health resorts, and being known now for medical tourism, and just had all the ingredients we thought that Chinese travelers would be interested in seeing. And we covered it more from the pop culture
Interesting
thing. So it's not like, okay, here's the history of Croatia, but more, like, look at the amazing food scene that's going on here, and look at there's now a great wine scene, and Croatia now has a huge truffle business, as big as Italy or France. Just the culture is this amazing blend. I mean, they were, at one point they were under the rule of the Romans, and then they were under the rule of the Greeks, and then they were under the rule of the Turks. So you've got this unbelievable mixed culture, which is fascinating, which most people don't know about. Like I say, when you're dealing with Paris and London, everybody kind of knows what is going to be. So we explored these kind of places, and we were going to go from the Balkans. Our next stop was the Middle East, and we're going to do Abu Dhabi and Qatar and Kuwait and all of those places. And, and then from there we were going to Africa. So that's the the Explore the World one. And again, that's for Mandarin speakers wherever they may be. And then, the other one they're doing, it's a big project. It's there was a woman who ruled China way back. And I think most people don't realize that there was actually a woman ruler for China. There was Empress Wu. And even to this day, when you talk to, Chinese scholars, they still think of her reign as being one of the most exciting in the history of China. It's kind of like when organized government came in. It's when laws, criminal laws came in and all this kind of stuff there. And so when I was in China, I would always kind of pick up little bits and pieces about her history there. But, and she kind of seemed like the George Washington of China. I said, but it's amazing that nobody knows who she is outside of China. Nobody's ever heard of her. And then on Chinese TV, there have been movies about her and TV series about her and all that stuff. So everybody in China knows of her, but outside of China, nobody does. So I decided that I wanted to do a story about her, and I found a book here in the U.S. that was written by a Western woman, and about her. So I bought the book rights, and when I went and talked to some of the folks in the Chinese government, I said, listen, if I do this movie in Mandarin, and subtitle it, maybe 0.1% of people will actually ever go see it.
Right.
I said, but if I do it with American-born Chinese and Canadian-born Chinese, and I do the movie in English, and it really focuses on her, the woman, as opposed to her, the historical Chinese figure, people might actually get to learn a little bit about Chinese history and Chinese culture. And the government guy said, absolutely, we get it. Do it in English. It's fine with us. So, with that in mind, I got the book rights. I went looking for a writer I felt could really do justice to this story. And, my slant on this is not just a historical Chinese thing. This is a woman's struggle to make it in a male-dominated society. Because she went through unbelievable stuff there, where the Chinese just freaked out that a woman was ruling the country. And they tried to do everything to get her out, and she fought. And again, like I say, it's considered one of the most, progressive eras in the history of China. So I found a writer that I love, is Ron Bass. Ron won the Academy Award for Rain Man.
Yes, right.
And he co-wrote Joy Luck Club. And so, worked with Ron on getting the script written, and then brought in a filmmaker out of Korea, a guy named Jun Choi, who ran CJ US, CJ being the biggest media company in Korea. And he's made, if you look at the Korean movie history, he's made 4 of the top 10 movies there. He's like a really great experienced filmmaker, and felt he could really do justice to this. So we brought him as a partner. And then brought Karen Moon on. Karen, again, Korean. She was the head of production for Paramount for many years. And so, it's this real interesting international thing. And, so we've got the script. We finally all agreed on the script, and we did our breakdowns and everything. And we were ready to start pre-production and casting and all of that. And then the pandemic came. We're waiting for things to clear up. And the idea is to shoot the exteriors in Xi'an, and the interiors we'll shoot in Vancouver, because we could build all sets in a soundstage, and it's easier to get Canadian Chinese and American Chinese to Vancouver than it is to get them into Beijing. So.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow, it's so timely. I mean, the story is sort of the right story at the right time.
Yeah, and then you look at it, so I see it as kind of like very King's Speech-like. It really is a deep dive into this woman's head, what she was going through and stuff like that. But also the other thing that's amazing is the fashion in that era was unbelievable.
Oh, I know. That must be spectacular.
Totally spectacular. And, by total coincidence, the Met Ball that they do in New York.
Right, right.
The big fashion thing. 2 years ago, or maybe it's even 3 by now, the most famous dress to come out of the Met Ball was a dress that was worn by Rihanna, which was designed actually by a Chinese couture designer named Guopei.
Oh, right.
And the dress was called the Empress dress.
Right,
I said, what a coincidence this is. So, just the pieces all seem to fit.
there's just amazing stuff that came out of that era. And like I say, going beyond just the movie, you could see a fashion line inspired by the Empress. I mean, you wouldn't do the same clothes, but inspired by those clothes.
Right. A lot of merch opportunities.
A lot of merch opportunities. And the other thing that the Empress did, which is kind of interesting, she used to send the army into the desert to get a special kind of clay. And she would use the clay for masks, skin masks. And she was known for having amazingly good skin. And I said, okay, this is a good one. We could design an urn, and we could actually have a skincare product that comes there. When you have a movie that's historical, you can't put Ford and Apple into it.
Right.
But here's an opportunity to bring in some products that could live beyond the movie.
And especially now, people are very interested in things that are natural, things that are organic. So the fact that this obviously has been made in an era when everything was natural and organic, that's a very good tie-in as well.
Yeah, and again, coincidentally, I found a skincare company out here that's owned by a Chinese woman, and it's the name of the skincare company is called MD Sun. So the woman runs the skincare company, and the husband is actually a doctor, who deals in dermatology and stuff like that. And she, her schooling was, she's born and raised in China, and her schooling was in history. And she knows the era, and she researched the ingredients that the Empress used and stuff like that. So, it'll be fun getting a product out there that really does relate to, what the Empress was using and stuff like that. So it's a fun project.
Sounds really great. What prompted you to get into this business with regard to, a focus on China?
Well, in total, I didn't do it necessarily on purpose, but I was doing, my E-days. We were global, the E's now in 140 countries, and I just love doing stuff outside the U.S. because I get to learn all this stuff. And I was doing a lot of stuff in Russia, and I was doing a big charity there up in St. Petersburg where we raised money for the Children's Hospital and the orphanage and stuff like that. And, through that, I got to meet a guy who then was the vice mayor of St. Petersburg. And the guy's name just so happens to be Vladimir Putin. So, obviously his fortunes rose and he ended up in the Kremlin. And the guy that he picked to be his Minister of Communications was an old friend of mine from Russia. And they asked me to come in and help them kind of rethink media laws and regulations, because as they moved to a consumer economy from this communist, planned economy, they realized that media had to be a little bit more, familiar to Western marketers. And so I had helped them, and then the Chinese kind of came to that same realization. That they had to change things a little. They liked the way the Russians reformed their media scene. They went to the Russians, and the Russians said, no. Vladimir's friend in Los Angeles did it for us. Here's his phone number. So, I actually got called on by, a government organization in China to come there and, basically work with young TV executives. And, the project was, teaching them the process of creativity for profit. And, which is a bizarre topic, but,
that's true.
I could get to go to China. That's so cool. And, so I went there and I loved it, and I loved the people. And, and then the folks that I met there, they said, hey, why don't you, start doing something, on a regular basis here. And that's kind of how I got into it.
Wow, that's really interesting. I guess what I'd ask you now is, how did you get involved with Russia? Because that seemed to be just before China.
Yeah. Again, kind of very coincidental. I was still at E, and a lawyer in town here had some clients that were merchant bankers.
Right.
And he was a very good friend of mine, and he said, Larry, my clients have been proposed a media deal in Russia. Would you mind going with them and tell me if you think this is a real deal and whether it's, something they should pursue and all of that. And again, I went, wow, I could get into Russia. Okay. Yeah, I'll do that. And, so I went on a trip with these guys and, went there. And of course, the deal that they were looking at, I thought didn't make any sense whatsoever. And I learned that quickly. But I met the mayor of St. Petersburg. And it was just when everything was really changing there. And, the mayor said, hey, with the collapse of the central government, the people with the smallest voices are getting hurt the most and they're dying, being, all senior citizens and kids. Said, I want to start a music festival to raise money for the Children's Hospital and the orphanage. Would you work with me? And I was like, well, I don't really do music and whatever. He goes, look, you gotta know it more than I do. I went, yeah, all right, that. And, plus looking at these kids' faces, I said, how could I not get involved there? So, we put together this thing called the White Nights Festival, which is now in its 30th year.
Oh, congratulations. Wow.
Yeah, I was supporting it, myself, all the infrastructure and overhead, planning. But then it became so big that it stands on its own. And, it continues every June 16th to June 21st, being the longest day of the year, which is why it's known as the White Nights Festival. And, it's this great festival that attracts about 750,000 people over the 6 days.
Incredible.
So that's how I got involved in Russia.
Interesting. You never know, right, where life will take you.
Yeah, and it's fun. And I always look for fun kind of things. And, because I'm in the media business, but I'm an independent, meaning that, I get offered to come and run this TV network or that TV network or this studio. But I'm basically unemployable. I can't work for anybody. So, I choose to be an independent. And, if you're going to be an independent, you got to go where the playing field is the most level.
Right.
And, in the U.S., it's, Time Warner, it's Rupert Murdoch, it's, the big monsters.
Right.
But in Russia, not only didn't they care about those same people, but they were actually afraid of them. So that, for someone like me who's an independent, they would much rather do stuff with me than they would with Rupert Murdoch, because they just feared him.
I wouldn't have realized that.
Yeah, even with the Chinese, when I started working with, some of the younger guys, not the old doctoring guys, but, the guys who, went to Harvard and Yale and, they've gone back, when I started, they're going, oh, why don't you set up and do stuff here? And, I was going, well, why are you being so kind to me? You basically ran Rupert out of the country. And they said, look, it's really simple. When we have a fight with Rupert, it ends up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. We have a fight with you, we go out for drinks, we scream and yell, but tomorrow we're okay. They said, at least for now, that's the way we want to do it.
Okay.
And that's how I got into China.
Kudos to you for taking the opportunity and for being able to turn it into such a big success.
Yeah, thanks.
If you're looking at China versus Russia, what do you see as the differences between working in each country?
Well, as I said, and things have changed from, when I was doing, necessarily in Russia, but, Russia was the Wild West. I mean, there were, people who took over, businesses with guns and, it was a dangerous place. I think, when I was there was this incredible statistic that in 1 year, I think it was 38 bankers were murdered on the streets of Moscow.
Oh my gosh. Sounds like New York.
So, when people would ask me the question, I go, okay, in Russia, if I, screw up, I lose my life. In China, if I screw up, I lose some money.
Right.
China's a not, not that there's, not business pitfalls there, but, it's not a dangerous place in the sense that, like, if a business deal goes sour, you're going to be murdered.
Right.
In Russia, it was tough. I mean, it's not like that anymore that I know of, but, for a while, it was just the Wild West.
Wow. I give you credit for not being afraid to go there and do business.
Well, it was either being brave or stupid. We're not quite sure which one it was. But yeah, I managed to, I grew up in what was a, pretty bad neighborhood in Brooklyn, New York and stuff. So, I wasn't necessarily afraid of many things. And,
right.
So I grew up, where the mafia was like in charge of the neighborhood and stuff. So I wasn't, scared away there. So it was okay for me.
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, if you had grown up in New York at that time, I suppose it was good training.
Yeah, and I grew up and I was a street kid. We weren't afraid of fight, whatever. I mean, it's just the way it was, and so I just wasn't intimidated. And plus, I just never was. I never had this fear of the word communism. I
Right.
mean, here we kind of think of communism as the boogeyman.
Right. Yeah.
And particularly, I mean, Russia was great training for me, for China, because
Mm.
I really got to understand the mentality and where people are coming from and stuff like that. So China was much easier for me than Russia was.
Yeah, and I guess like you said, China, by the time you got to China, China had evolved a lot.
Yeah, tremendous amount.
So how did you get from Brooklyn to California and into entertainment?
Yeah, well, I was the first kid in the family, family of immigrants, first kid in the family to go to college, and I got a degree in economics, and my parents wanted me to get a nice, secure job with some government-related things so I could retire and have a pension and, do all of that. So
Right.
I was thinking, okay, I'll become a history and economics teacher. And New York City cut the budgets, and they put a hold on hiring any new teachers and stuff, so I couldn't go that route. So I took a job. A friend of mine was in the electricians union, and they just organized this new industry called cable TV. And he knew somebody there, and he sent me there, and I got a job that I thought was going to be just, a few months temporary thing. They gave me a job as an assistant splicer under the streets of Manhattan, which was just bizarre. So, I did that, and, cable was just beginning to, take hold in the marketplace. When I did it, most of my friends said, Larry, you got to be out of your mind. Who would ever pay for television? But, I stayed there, and I managed to advance very quickly. A lot of it had to do with, being able to read and write. I not only was I the only college person there, but I think I might have even been the only one with a high school diploma. So I kind of rose through the ranks very, very quickly. And, within like 4 years, I was the head of operations in Manhattan, which was, I was 25 years old, and I had 300 people reporting to me, and I had, engineering and construction and service and, all of these departments reporting to me. And then, then Time Inc. bought the company. Time Inc. at that time was basically a publishing company.
Yeah, that's right.
Stuff like that. And, so you had the Harvard and Yale guys and, up on 6th Avenue going, well, what is it that these guys really do that go into the ground every day? And, and then somebody in HR said, wait a second, there's a guy there that has an economics degree. And so, I became kind of the interface between the techies and the MBA types. And then, eventually I became part of the Timing Video Group, and they put me in charge of corporate development, which is to find new uses for cable television other than just good reception. And so I got to do a lot of biz dev related stuff. And then, all of a sudden cities decided that cable was something they wanted, and they started issuing franchises. All the big cities, even LA.
Right.
And but all of them didn't want wires on the telephone poles. They said, well, if we're going to put new wires up, we want them all to go under the ground so you don't see them. Well, the only one who knew how to build underground cable systems was me, because Manhattan was all underground.
Right. Wow.
And so I just turned 30, and I got recruited by a company that won the franchise for Los Angeles to build the first 61-channel two-way cable system ever built, which, at that time, 61 channels,
That's
unthinkable,
huge.
because the average was 17, and here we're going to build 61. And it was going to be interactive and, all of that stuff there. So I got recruited by this company to move out to LA, and first I resisted, but then they literally offered me 4 times what I was making. So I had no choice. So I came out to LA, and I ran that company, and I built that company. Then the company I worked for, which was actually a Canadian company, they sold the company, and they moved back to Toronto. And, they wanted me to go. And I said, wait a second, I didn't go from Brooklyn to Los Angeles to go to Toronto. I kind of liked the warm weather and, all of that. So I stayed in LA, and that's when a friend of mine and I just started playing with ideas that we thought might make sense in that, that new world of, cable technology and stuff. And that's when we came up with the idea for E, and was silly enough to think that, two guys from the East Coast could just start a TV network. So we just went ahead and did it. It's
wow,
obviously
good for
turned
you.
out well. It is now in 140 countries. And arguably the biggest influencer in pop culture in the world. I mean, the Kardashians are huge.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we did a lot of that other stuff. So, that's kind of how I ended up in the entertainment side of the world. And, when the company grew big, as soon as in its first year, we expanded to 14 countries because everybody was interested in Hollywood gossip.
Right.
And I just love the international stuff. So, I brought in someone to run the U.S. day-to-day, still reporting to me. And then I went off and started doing, stuff around the world. And I loved it. And that's kind of what led me to be adventurous and go to Russia and do all that stuff.
What a great story.
It's been an interesting road, yeah.
There's not that many people that would take that kind of a risk and carve their own path like you did.
Yeah. Well, my parents never understood it. They kept going, even when E started, and they would come out here and here I am living in a big house in, Beverly Hills and, all of that. They just never got it. They just go, well, what are you going to do when you want to retire? I'm going, I don't need to think about that anymore. And then I eventually sold the company to Comcast. And that's kind of my story.
What an incredible journey. I understand that you have a new venture called FanVestor.
Yeah, FanVestor, I don't know, maybe I'm the eternal optimist, but, when in every dark cloud, I look for the silver lining. So, with this pandemic and the quarantines and stuff, I just said, what, the media and entertainment business is going to change, at least for the next few years, and possibly some parts will change forever.
Right.
And, I think the theater business, building 16-screen multiplexes and stuff. And, it used to make sense. I don't think it makes sense anymore. I mean, the days where I would just sit here and go, oh, it's Thursday, I have nothing to do this afternoon, I think I'll go to the movies.
Right.
And then I would look to see if something wasn't bad. There's no way I'm going to, to just go to the movies. I mean, I'll go see Star Wars, I'll go see Masters of the Universe or whatever. But, for the most part, all those other movies, I'll watch them on Netflix. I'm fine. So, I looked at that and, then I started really looking at the whole world of celebrities and entertainers and musicians and sports figures. And I said, what, if you're a band, there used to be the days where you could make an album and you'd have one good song and 12 bad ones, but you'd still sell the album for $20.
Right.
That's how you made your money. And then digital technology came along and changed that, with iTunes and everything, where now the bands, had to look, they weren't getting their $20 anymore. They're only selling the one song for $1.29.
Right.
And it took them a while, but they realized that their money is going to be concerts and touring.
Mm.
And that's where the revenue came from. And then, festivals came along and from festivals and touring, then the merchandise kind of followed. Well, now with the pandemic, nobody's touring. There are no festivals, and it's not coming back this fall. People can go, well, it'll be back in the fall. It ain't coming back in the fall.
Right, for sure.
I can see, you look at the average age of things like Coachella, the big festivals and stuff. I mean, these are kids that go there. What parent is letting a kid go and sit with 100,000 other kids without a mask? So we said, okay, there's got to be, opportunities for these celebrities who lots of them started to think of other things they want to do.
Right.
Other than, the actors are thinking of stuff. People are selling skincare lines and fashion lines, hotel line, and all of this stuff. And so, and the managers are thinking the people I represent need new ways to make money. So, I found these finance guys and, brilliant in finance, particularly international finance and compliance and all of that stuff. They were working on this system where fans of anything, whether it be an actor, an actress, sports figure, musician, whatever, could actually invest in securities that are related to the people that they consider heroes. I said, this is perfect. Now, all the celebrities want to do something different. They don't have access capital. There's this company that can then take their avid fans and raise the capital from the fans. And, the examples were, in the U.S., the football team, the Green Bay Packers.
Right.
Well, they'll realize the Green Bay Packers are owned by their fans.
Oh, really?
They're a publicly traded company. The fans own the team.
I didn't know that.
And in the last 45 years, no matter whether they were good or bad, there's never been an empty seat at the Packer game because people put they don't care if they make money on the Packer stock. They just they put the certificate on the walls. I'm supporting my.
Right.
So, you've got a lot of that. And then you take David Bowie, who did this thing called Bowie Bonds, where his record company, 86 or 87% of the publishing rights to Bowie's music were being realized by the company, and he was only getting 13%. And so he went into this public vehicle with these bonds and raised money to buy back his music from the record company. So then he got the 87%, then he got 100% of it. And so the musicians are looking to do that kind of stuff. And, everybody's looking for new ways. And I said, FanVestor is the way to provide capital for those new ways. So that's why I got involved in it.
It's interesting to see the new innovations that have been spawned by this pandemic.
So, I think the world changes, when, in my core businesses and stuff in the production side of the world, I've always been into new technology and new ways of doing business and stuff. So I've always been okay. But, most people, I talk to people who, make the movies, I say, why don't you just make that movie and go to Netflix with it? They go, oh, no, I'm a filmmaker and my movies need to be in the movie theater. And then I talk to people going, hey, did you see that thing on Netflix last night? And they go, no, I don't watch that kind of stuff. It's not good. And, I'm going, you don't have a clue because, you take Netflix, TV has never been better.
Right.
I mean, the quality of the stuff on Netflix is amazing. And, so this kind of forced, those snobbish people to, really start paying attention to the way the world has changed. People who wouldn't watch Netflix before are now watching Netflix and going, hey, you know what? This is pretty good. And Netflix, Amazon, Disney. I mean, I'm just talking about digital platforms, not just Netflix.
Yeah,
and,
Amazon's done a lot.
And then just filmmakers who wouldn't, think of making stuff for anything other than a theater are realizing that, hey, you better start paying attention to, where the audience is. And the audience is no longer in the movie theater. So, so people have had to be more creative and new business models kind of arise. And I think it inspires incredible creativity. Like I say, I watch Netflix in awe sometimes. People always say to me, oh, Larry, we feel so bad. You're a TV guy and TV is going out of business. And I'm going, what are you talking about? I go, it's never been better. I mean, you look at shows like Ozark on Netflix, it's the level of writing
right.
is The Godfather. It's up there with the best stuff that's ever been done.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Amazon's done a very good job with a lot of the stuff on their Prime. And people sort of, put it down in the beginning, right? Oh, Amazon is going to try to be in the movie business or in the TV business. But it turned out that, like you said, they had the wherewithal to hire good people.
Yeah,
so they got good quality.
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess the part that's very hard, at least for me, to figure out is with all these live events not being possible for a fairly long time. You can translate movies onto Netflix, theater onto Netflix, but what do you do about all the live things? I mean, digital platforms for that have been struggling a bit to make people, to build that engagement. You know what I'm saying? What do you see happening with that? Where's the opportunity?
So I've actually been getting, interestingly, companies that have kind of come to me, and going, all right, Larry, there's got to be more than doing a Zoom call.
Right. Well, that's just it. Yeah.
So, I've got companies that have been asking me to come in and consult with them on how you can create a visual experience that is interesting and fun and stuff like that beyond just, the Zoom call kind of thing. And I haven't taken one on yet. I've just kind of been looking and saying, okay, who's real? And I will take one. I'm just want to know who's going to be really serious about this, and willing to realize that this is not going to change in 2 weeks.
Right.
It's something that you're going to have to say where you think it's going and then build towards it. And I don't know if it ever comes back to the way it was.
Yeah, I think it'll take a while. Technology, you can do anything, right? Especially if you have the budget, you can pay for the best possible system and all. But the question that I keep coming back to again and again and again, and maybe because I'm just too close to it that I'm not seeing it, how do you build that engagement with the viewer? Because you can put on all these things and do all this stuff, but is the guy on the other side of the screen going to sit there and watch it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I say, that's what, a few people, reached out to me and asked me whether I would come in and kind of help them figure that out. Because I do know I'm probably the most knowledgeable person, Hollywood person on the tech side anyway.
Yeah, you are.
So just, kind of figure that stuff out. And it's a challenge. There's no question. But there is hope. Again, you can look for the hope. And I say, okay, what was one of the insurmountable, areas of my world, the production world? Broadway plays, great area. I always looked and said, wow, Broadway plays would be great on television. And every one that I've ever seen was been horrible. And then I tried one myself, and it was horrible. It never captured,
the feeling, right?
The feeling of being there and seeing this amazing production, live and stuff like that. And like I said, I did one myself, and I wanted to throw up when I looked at it. It's just awful. But then you take, but Disney did Hamilton. It's amazing. They figured out how to do Broadway. And I watched it 3 hours. There was an intermission. You would say, oh my God, who's going to watch 3 hours? It was not the same as being in the audience, but the overall experience was amazingly good. And I just sat there and going, how did they figure this out? And I didn't. So you say, you know what? There's room for breakthrough. If you get the right people in the thing and you fund it properly, this stuff will get figured out. Yeah, and sometimes, you need to bring in some minds that are, come from a different place where they're not that close to it. And the mistake for me is I tried to catch the Broadway play literally.
Right.
And yet with Hamilton, they just took a whole different approach to how to do that. And I just sat there shaking my head going, oh my God, is this good?
Yeah, that's the thing, to be able to find people who can bring that point of view that isn't so close to the spokes. And they just see it. They see the thing that you don't see because you're just too close to it.
Absolutely. And you're trying to replicate what you did in, real life. And that may not be the answer.
Yeah. Well, Larry, thank you so much for getting on the podcast. And it's just been great talking to you. Really excited about all these projects. Looking forward to seeing the Empress and hearing more about how FanVestor unfolds.
All righty. Well, thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, please subscribe to our podcast, where you'll get to hear from some of the industry's leaders and innovators. And if you're looking for an easier way to keep up to date on sourcing shifts, new technology, supply chain strategies, emerging markets, and of course e-commerce, head on over to our website, InsideFashionLive.net, and consider subscribing to our weekly newsletters. You'll also find all of our contact information there. Please feel free to contact us with any ideas, suggestions, or questions. That's InsideFashionLive.net.